let's talk a little bit about I don't know. I mean, you also wrote about the Republicans are getting a little bit nervous about the so-called big lie, but also, you know, the January 6th commission. These were big arrests yesterday.
Yes.
Give me your take on this, because, you know, we had heard reports in the past about the Oath Keepers, you know, sort of like being on the outskirts of town, DC, with weapons caches and, you know, like waiting for a signal. I don't know if like a smoke was supposed to come from the Capitol, or a flag, you know, a Trump 2020 flag raised on over the Capitol or something. But the amazing thing about that, which I haven't, you know, I imagine people have brought up, but I haven't heard anybody really talk about, is that that suggests that maybe at least they knew that this wasn't going to be a spontaneous attack on the Capitol.
Well, it sure does. I mean, it sure does. And, you know, there's like only a couple of degrees of separation from these guys from the White House. Roger Stone was with the Oath Keepers on the morning of January 6th. We all know Roger Stone is, you know, Donald Trump's big buddy. He's involved in the Willard Hotel stuff, you know, with Steve Bannon and Rudy Giuliani and all this stuff. So, I mean, it always seems so weird because when you're talking about Donald Trump and his machinations, it's such a clown show that you think, you know, how bad could it have been? But here we're dealing with something I think that's pretty serious in a way that I don't know that we've thought about it before. This is a militia group, essentially. These guys are ex-military and ex-cops. And actually, they say about 10% of the members are current military and cops. These are people who are trained, right? I mean, obviously they're trained in violent, you know, kinetic activity, as they call it. From November on, they were planning this. It appears they have all these signal, you know, communications back and forth between these people. There is some connection, but among them, it looks like probably between the Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers, maybe the 3%ers, which are the top three groups, these militia groups that were there. That, you know, they were planning for this. I mean, it's obvious that at least in the case of Stuart Rhodes, the head of the Oath Keepers, that they were talking about storming the Capitol on January 6th. They were talking about holding it. We knew that they had, you know, maps of the underground, you know, tunnels in the Capitol, et cetera, and that they had these caches of weapons outside. I mean, what this suggests, and you know, this is why they were charged with sedition, which is different than the other ones have been charged with up to now, because this really does suggest that they were planning to do the thing that actually happened, that they were planning to do this. And for whatever reason, their plan was aborted, which appears to be that they thought if they could hold the Capitol through the night, that they could send out this signal, and these people who were arrayed around the area, what would happen is, they said, was that they would go in, they would storm the Capitol, then they would actually fall back as the rubes who were following their, you know, just spontaneously following their orders, which tells you something about them. And then they would fall back, and then they would get their weapons and come back and go into the Capitol later and hold the Capitol. Now, the whole thing sounds ridiculous, right? I mean, this is like, you know, nuts. But, you know, I mean, I'm not sure I couldn't have seen that happening, and that might have worked under certain circumstances that day. And, you know, it's not like we haven't seen these militia types do things in the past. I mean, you know, the Oklahoma City bombing was the same group, was done by a person who was part of the same, you know, basic, you know, tribal group that we're talking about here. He was ex-military, he was in a militia, he had read all the Turner diaries and all that stuff. And he went and he blew up a federal building and killed, you know, hundreds of people. The worst terrorist attack before 9/11 was done by people like this. So I don't, and, you know, I mean, this stuff's been around for a long time, but this is particularly, you know, it has been particularly activated in the age of first Barack Obama for obvious reasons, and then Donald Trump. So, you know, we're looking at something that I think is a very serious situation. I don't know if the Department of Justice will be able to prove this case in some way, but I think what they're trying to do, they've obviously got some people who are cooperating. I mean, that's how they got the information, the documents that they have. And I don't know whether or not this is going to turn out to, take this to a higher level. But I think what astonishes me about it, and I mean, we know, so much of what's happened, and maybe the January 6th committee has more, the Department of Justice seems to have more than we know. So this is evolving as a story. But the fact is that Donald Trump and his big lie on the other side of this, and has been aided and abetted by Fox News and the gazillion podcasts by people like Steve Bannon, have truly made this a debatable question as to whether or not this was a good thing to do, whether or not this was the right thing to do. I mean, Trump is, I don't know if people probably don't read the statements that he sends out to every one of the people on his millions of email, recipients, on his donor list. But it's crazy. I mean, he sounds like a raving lunatic, and I'm saying that worse than he did before when he was in office, because his obsession with January 6th, actually his obsession with the November election, I should say, is so nuts. I mean, he's out there, we just found 3 more votes in Pima County, I mean, that kind of stuff he sends out to all these people.
Right.
And if you listen to that NPR interview that he did this week, where he was actually confronted with the fact that he's just, making shit up, that tells you where his mind is. And these people are all buying into this stuff. And look at what's happened to the Republican Party. They are now backing this to the point where anybody who objects to what happened on January 6th, I mean, this guy, Mike Rounds, said, well, Joe Biden really did win the election and we need to move forward. A few sort of tiptoed behind him, John Thune and some others. But really, it's a consensus within the Republican Party that they have to go along with this because their constituency has been completely brainwashed into believing that the election was stolen. And now the second half is that January 6th was a justified action. I mean, that's kind of scary. And, so we'll see this where this case goes, but, I don't know, can that change? I don't even know if it's changeable at this point.
And let me just add to that dynamic. I don't think it's just that the Republican Party outside of Donald Trump is forced to go along with this.
No.
I think that there is a significant portion of the Republican elected leadership who are opportunistic and see that this is a viable and valuable path. And that's what's so dangerous about this. Donald Trump could be a lunatic and, Roger Stone could be a lunatic, and these guys who had weapons out stored, it's not like, I remember the FBI setting up people like, these quasi, terrorists who they just needed boots and uniform to take over, 4 guys who were going to plan over to take over the U.S. government. If they had boots and and pants that they were trying to secure, they were trying to get uniforms. They had no weapons. They felt like they had the uniforms that they would do it. And these guys had weapons. They had full-on weapon caches. You see how they're dressed. I mean, they're fully buffed up. They may or may not have been able to do. I mean, I suspect the way that it would have gone down would not be that they're in charge of everything after that happens, but the delay could have caused enough of a crisis that we need to re-examine the ballots. And instead of 9 senators, whatever it was, we now have 51 senators to look at this, because this is a crisis, and this the American people have spoken, and blah blah blah. I mean, it could have gone that way, but I think even more dangerous. And why it's even more incumbent to have these hearings and to arrest people and to follow, pull these strings is that somebody, I don't know if it's, Madison Cawthorn or whatever that guy's name is, or or Matt Gaetz, or frankly, Ron Johnson, is sitting there going like, "Hey, wait a second. There's gold in these MR hills, and this is, if I want to be a Republican politician, I do, and I want to be president, I do. This is the way I do it." And it's not that Donald Trump has forced them into something. For some of these people, it's that Donald Trump has shown them the promised land.
Of course.
And they're just not as idiotic as he is. He stumbled across it, and they're like, wait a second, that's where I'm headed. And so this is all a blueprint.
Yeah, of course it is. And consider this. I mean, this voter fraud thing that Donald Trump didn't invent that. Republicans have been saying this for decades. The former Chief Justice of the United States, William Rehnquist, was part of a group back in the 1960s in Arizona called Operation Eagle Eye that was out there suppressing the vote of Latinos in Arizona. I mean, that came up at his confirmation hearings. Of course, he naturally was confirmed anyway because, well, that's how we do things. But, this has been going on for a very long time. They seeded the ground of voter fraud as an issue for someone like Donald Trump to come in and just completely run with it. And now, and his people and the Republican Party, when they hear this, when Republicans hear what Donald Trump says, voter fraud, they stole the election, it was fraud everywhere you look. They, brought in late night votes. I was winning until 11 o'clock and then suddenly I wasn't. All this stupid stuff that he says that, the normal people look at and go, well, that's crazy. Of course they're counting votes. What are you talking about? Those people have been primed for decades from people like Rush Limbaugh, from Fox News, from Republican politicians, from the entire conservative movement to believe that voter fraud is a huge, huge problem in this country. And remember, they took that all the way to the Supreme Court when they, did the voter ID case. And the Supreme Court, they've offered the Supreme Court evidence that there was no voter fraud, and there isn't, and there never has been. I mean, I'm not saying zero, but there's nothing systematic or anything that has ever changed an election as far as we know. And the Supreme Court went, well, yeah, that's true, but just to settle people's minds, we can allow these kinds of restrictions because people have doubts about the election system. Well, I mean, the sowing of these doubts about the election system is what's working for Republicans. Always has, by the way. But now they're seeing how Donald Trump put them in a position of taking what they had been working on for years and years and turning it into a real mass movement now that believes that our entire electoral system is rigged in favor of Democrats, which is, I'm going, how come you guys have been in charge, so much then? How does that happen? But, this is the belief system that they've inculcated into their constituency, and they believe it now. And I think one of the things you have to think about, which is, what happens if Democrats do win legitimately next time, say in 2022? Big surprise. All the prognosticators, they're gloom and doom. It's impossible for Democrats to win. They can't possibly win. It's a midterm, blah, blah, blah. Well, what if Democrats eke it out? Maybe, the American public says, you know what, this is BS. We're going to go out, we're going to vote. And they vote the Democrats back in. They will not believe it. I mean, the other side will lose their minds. In other words, they will not allow themselves to lose elections going forward. It just won't happen. And
we just had a conversation the other day about this sort of this, with Osita Nuevo, I guess it was last Friday. We've trained them also to believe that they should rule the country, even though they have consistently less votes. Whether it's in the Senate or whether it's, in the presidency. I mean, the idea that they have such a hold on, and so that it doesn't even occur to them that they have less votes. They just assume if Donald Trump's president, more Americans voted for him. If George Bush is president, more Americans voted for him. If the Republicans have 50 members in the Senate, it's because more Americans voted for him. I mean, and I think also people should keep in mind you know, you hear people talk about the Overton window, or you hear people talk about, you know, this guy staking out this position gives this person, this woman, you know, more oxygen over here, or the next time, just the act of the storming of the Capitol becomes the new benchmark as to what is theoretically wrong behavior. I mean, you still have a lot of people out there going like, whoa, it's just like, you know, they're just checking out the Capitol. They're just a bunch of old guys checking out the Capitol. Not that big of a deal. Like, but even if someone doesn't buy that like, oh yeah, there were people storming the Capitol and there were people waiting with the weapons to come in on the outskirts in the perimeter. If that doesn't, we don't reach that bar, then they can get away with anything up to that point, and it be just like, well, it's politics.
Well, at least they didn't storm the Capitol. I mean,
exactly.
You know, they didn't storm the Capitol, so we're good. The system worked.
Yeah. Yeah.
We survived, so it's all good. I know. I mean, this is craziness, and I don't see it ending. You know, whatever people thought, you know, there's been a lot of discussion this week about the voting rights thing, which we haven't talked about, but you know, the fact that it does seem to be dead in the water. And there's a lot of discussion, should they have gone earlier with that and, you know, done that rather than go with the big economic packages, you know, and back and forth. But, you know, the truth is that I don't know that after January 6th, I think people thought, I mean, we were all stunned and shocked and just, oh my God, they impeached Trump again. You know, they didn't do it right, but they did impeach him. But I think there was some thought that, you know, okay, this has to be it, right? I mean, this is the thing that's going to cut it off. You had even Lindsey Graham saying, count me out, you know. And if they had tried to pass the voting rights thing at that point, it's entirely possible that people would have gone, you know, come on, let's try and, we need to be the saucer that cools the tea, you know, and let's not really push this too hard right now. I totally believe people said that and thought that somehow or another things were going to, we needed to cool off and we needed to cool down and everybody needed to regroup, and that Donald Trump was going to fade because he was out of office and he wasn't on Twitter, and, you know, let's everybody just relax here. So I'm not sure it would have worked better then, because I think there was a lot of feeling that was the impression I got from the leadership. But it's been the opposite. This thing is growing. It's not cooling off, it's getting worse. And, you know, the anti-vax movement, we're seeing that implicated here. We're seeing this. And, you know, I mean, the fact that somebody like Kirsten Sinema or Joe Manchin can't see that and don't care, apparently.
They don't care. They don't care.
They have their own reasons for doing what they're doing, which we've talked about, you know, for hours on end over the course of the last year or so. But, you know, this is getting worse. And, you know, the more we find out about this, the worse it was at the time, and it's getting worse than what it was at the time. And, you know, I have every reason to think that there's going to be some form of violence. I cannot see how that's not going to happen. I just don't see how that's not going to happen.
I mean, what you're describing is the only metric that we have to judge the leadership of the Democratic Party. And, you know, whether it was Joe Biden saying, give me 6 months after Donald Trump's gone, man, don't worry, Jack. And Schumer and Pelosi slow walking things after the passage of the stimulus. Biden insisting on making this bipartisan and inviting Republicans to debate. And then when Republicans couldn't come up with something, we'll have Portman Cinema and we're going to do the whole process and this and that. You know, there is, I will never believe that Joe Biden wanted to be less popular than Donald Trump at this stage in his presidency. There has been an abject failure on all of these counts. Was this inevitable because COVID came roaring back in a way that they didn't anticipate? Or, you know, I mean, maybe when you put like, you know, business people in charge of testing, they don't understand the importance of what can happen. And then that's why you get tests destroyed. But even if you take out the COVID stuff, which maybe they deserve some blame, maybe they don't. the fact of the matter is that there's not a lot of room for error and not a big margin of, where you can afford failure. And these failures in these other places exacerbate the failure across the board. And this, it's amazing to me. We don't hear more complaints about the Democratic leadership, because to go from a year ago, January 14th or January 20th, or whatever you want to date it to the COVID relief bill, to today, if you and I had sat there and go like January 14th, 2022, nothing's going to have passed. Nothing. There'll be no filibuster reform. Nothing will have passed. No one will be, they'll be just arraigning some people about January 6th, but it will be so contentious that people are just going to be able to write it off as political. Biden will be less popular than Donald Trump. We would have said, hey, we need to stop. People need to not have this happen, right? Like this can't have been the plan.
We were talking about adding Puerto Rico as statehood. We were talking about, adding people to the Supreme Court. I mean, there was a sense, I thought, that we knew there was an emergency, right? I mean, this was going into the election. Yep. We knew there was an emergency. Something terrible was happening. I mean, Donald Trump, and it wasn't just COVID. It was everything. And we realized it. And then suddenly it was like, well, we're just going to go back to normal. We're going to, go and haggle over some spending bills for, a year, and they won't pass because, we only have a 50-50 Senate. And we'll just pretend, I don't know, party like it's 2000 and,
Yep. Good thing is at least we have, the one thing they have achieved is we have that strong Republican Party that they wanted so badly. Right.
Right.
The strong parties. Well, now we have it. So congratulations to Biden and Pelosi.
We have one strong party. We have one strong party.
Exactly.
We do. And they are very strong and getting stronger, by the way. So, we should all be very happy.
Heather, I could talk to you for another couple hours, but we're going to have to wait and do that in a couple more weeks. But as always, a real pleasure. Folks, check out the Uber blog, Hullabaloo, at digby'sblog.blogspot.com still?
Just Blogspot, digby'sblog.net. Sorry.
.net.
digby'sblog.net.
And, of course, at Salon. Thanks so much, Heather. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. It was fun to talk to you.